I pulled my beat-up Honda into the warehouse parking lot at 10:30, gravel crunching under the tires as I found a spot between two pickup trucks that had seen better days. The building stood ahead of me, a massive concrete box with loading docks stretching along one side and a few scattered windows that glowed yellow against the October darkness. Not exactly inspiring, but the pay was double what I'd been making back home. The move from Alberta had cleaned out my savings, and Mom's medical bills weren't getting any smaller. This job was my shot at actually getting ahead instead of just surviving paycheck to paycheck. I grabbed my thermos and the folder with my paperwork, checking my reflection in the side mirror. First day nerves were stupid at 26, but here I was anyway, smoothing down my ponytail and making sure my work shirt looked presentable. The job posting had been vague. Warehouse associate, night shift, competitive wages, but competitive turned out to mean $22 an hour plus benefits. In rural Alberta, I'd been lucky to make 13. The front office was a small addition tacked onto the main building, all fluorescent lights and beige everything. A tired-looking woman behind the reception desk handed me a clipboard thick with forms. Caroline Walker, that's me. Welcome to North Point Logistics. I'm Sandra from HR. Just need you to fill these out, then we'll get you started with orientation. I worked through the usual paperwork. Tax forms, emergency contacts, direct deposit information. The safety waiver was longer than most, with sections about working alone, following protocols, and reporting incidents immediately. Standard stuff. Though they seemed particularly concerned about employees leaving their assigned areas during shifts. Any questions about the forms? Sandra asked when I handed everything back. The safety section mentions specific protocols for night shift workers. Is there additional training for that? She glanced at the papers, then back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your supervisor will cover everything you need to know. Jim's been here longer than anyone. He'll take good care of you. Something in her tone suggested there was more to it, but before I could ask, she was already standing up. Let me show you to the break room. Jim should be starting his shift soon. The warehouse floor was bigger than I'd expected, with rows of metal shelving stretching up toward a ceiling lost in shadows. Forklifts sat parked in neat lines, and the air smelled like cardboard and industrial cleaner. Our footsteps echoed as we walked past loading docks and conveyor systems that would probably be humming with activity during day shifts. The break room was a small space with mismatched tables, a refrigerator that had seen better decades, and a coffee maker that looked like it might be older than me. A few vending machines lined one wall, and someone had taped motivational posters around the room that were trying way too hard to be inspiring. Jim will be along shortly, Sandra said. Coffee's free, and there's a microwave if you bring lunch. Bathrooms down the hall, and the security office is just past that. Any other questions? What exactly will I be doing? The job description was pretty general. Inventory management mostly. Checking shipments, updating computer records, some light organizing. Jim will walk you through the specific procedures. She paused at the door. Just remember to follow his instructions exactly. Night shift has its own way of doing things. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the humming fluorescent lights and the distant sound of something mechanical cycling on and off. I poured coffee from the pot. It was stronger than I usually drank, but it was going to be a long night. At 10:55, a man walked into the break room who had to be Jim. He was maybe 50-something, stocky and solid, with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that came from years of physical work. His flannel shirt was faded but clean, and he carried himself with the careful posture of someone whose back had taken a beating over the years. You must be Caroline. His handshake was firm, calloused. Jim Lloyd, I'll be showing you the ropes tonight. Thanks, I appreciate you taking the time. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me at one of the plastic tables. Sandra get you through all the paperwork? Yeah, everything's signed. She mentioned you'd cover the specific procedures for night shift. Jim nodded slowly, studying my face like he was trying to figure something out. How much did they tell you about this job when you applied? Not much. Warehouse work, night hours, good pay. I've done inventory before, so I figured it would be pretty straightforward. Right. He took a sip of coffee, still watching me. Thing is, night shift here isn't quite like other places. We've got our own way of doing things, our own protocols. The way he said protocols made it sound like more than just company policy. What kind of protocols? Jim glanced toward the door, then back at me. Look, I'm going to give you some information that's not in any employee handbook. It's not official company policy, but it's important. More important than anything Sandra told you today. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a laminated card, about the size of an index card, and slid it across the table. The plastic was worn smooth at the edges, like it had been handled a lot. What's this? Night shift safety protocol. Read it, memorize it, follow it exactly. No exceptions, no shortcuts, no thinking you know better. I picked up the card. The text was typed in a simple font, numbered 1 through 5. 1. Do not look at security monitors between 2 a.m. and 2:15 a.m. 2. Avoid the water fountain by employee lockers between 2:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. 3. If you hear barking at 3:15 a.m., immediately find another worker. Do not investigate alone. 4. At 4 a.m., sit in the break room facing away from the door. Do not respond to scratching or voices. 5. If you see yourself on security cameras, mark that area off limits and take alternate routes. I read through the list twice, waiting for Jim to crack a smile or tell me it was some kind of initiation prank. He didn't. This is serious? Dead serious. His voice was flat, matter of fact. I've been working nights here for 8 years. I've seen 3 people ignore those rules, and none of them came back for their second shift. What do you mean they didn't come back? I mean, they quit. Or said they quit. Point is, they're not here anymore. Jim's hands were wrapped around his coffee mug, and I noticed they had a slight tremor. Look, I know how this sounds. I know what you're thinking. But humor me, okay? Memorize those rules before midnight. Follow them exactly. Think of it as workplace safety. I looked at the card again. The specific times were weird, and the content was bizarre, but Jim's expression was completely serious. No hint of humor or hazing. What happens if I don't follow them? Bad things. Things that'll make you quit this job and never want to work nights anywhere again. He leaned forward slightly. Caroline, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to keep you safe. This is a good job. The pay is real. The benefits are solid. And if you can handle the night shift, you'll have steady work for as long as you want it. But you have to follow the rules. I folded the card and slipped it into my pocket. Okay, I'll memorize them. Good. Some of the tension left his shoulders. Now, let me show you the actual work. That part's straightforward enough. We spent the next hour walking through the warehouse. Jim showed me the computer system for tracking inventory, the areas where incoming shipments were staged, and the sections I'd be responsible for organizing. The work itself was exactly what I had expected. Checking items against manifests, updating database records, moving boxes to their proper locations. You'll mostly be working alone, Jim explained as we walked past rows of shelving. I do security rounds every hour, check the perimeter, make sure everything's locked up. Other than that, it's just you and whatever needs doing. How many people work nights? Depends on the week. Tonight it's just us, plus maybe 1 or 2 others. Day shift has 20 people. Night shift has a higher turnover rate. We ended up back at the security office, a small room with a desk, a bank of monitors showing different areas of the warehouse, and a time clock mounted on the wall. You'll clock in here at 11, clock out at 7. Take your breaks when you need them, but try to stay on schedule with the major tasks. Jim handed me a clipboard with a checklist. This is your route for tonight. Start with Section A. Work your way through. Should take about 6 hours if you stay focused. I looked at the list. It was detailed but manageable. Seems straightforward. It is, as long as you remember what we talked about. Jim checked his watch. It's 11 now. You ready to get started? I clocked in and headed to Section A with my clipboard and a hand scanner for updating inventory records. The warehouse felt different with most of the lights dimmed and no day shift activity. Quieter but not silent. There were always mechanical sounds, air circulation systems, the occasional creak of metal settling. The work was methodical and oddly soothing. Scan a barcode. Check it against the manifest. Update the count in the system. Move boxes that were in the wrong spots. Note any damaged items. I fell into a rhythm, working my way through the shelves systematically. At 11:45, I took my first break. The break room was empty, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I poured fresh coffee and sat at the same table where Jim had given me the rules. The laminated card was still in my pocket. I pulled it out and read through the list again, trying to make sense of it. Security cameras, water fountains, barking, scratching, seeing doubles. It sounded like something from a horror movie, not workplace safety. But Jim's hands had been shaking when he gave it to me, and Sandra's expression when I'd asked about night shift protocols had been careful, like she was choosing her words. I heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to see another worker passing by, a younger guy, maybe early 20s, wearing a red hoodie. He glanced into the break room but didn't stop or wave, just kept walking with his head down. A few minutes later, I saw someone else through the doorway, older, wearing a button-down shirt that seemed too formal for warehouse work. He was carrying a notebook and walking with the deliberate pace of someone who was thinking hard about something. So there were other people here. Jim had said maybe one or two others, and I'd seen at least two. But neither of them had acknowledged me, and something about their body language suggested they were focused on their own survival rather than being social. I checked my watch. 11:58, 2 minutes until midnight. I read through the rules one more time, committing each line to memory. The specific times, the exact instructions. By the time the minute hand hit 12, I had them memorized. Rule 1, don't look at security monitors between 2 and 2:15 a.m. Rule 2, avoid the water fountain between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Rule 3, find another worker if I heard barking at 3:15. Rule 4, sit in the break room facing away from the door at 4 a.m. Rule 5, mark areas off limits if I saw myself on cameras. I folded the card and put it back in my pocket. Whatever this was, hazing, superstition, or something else entirely, I'd play along. The pay was too good to risk, and Jim had been genuinely concerned about my safety. Time to get back to work. I sat at the security desk with my turkey sandwich, checking my watch for the third time in 5 minutes. 1:55 a.m. 20 minutes until the first rule kicked in. The sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I needed something to keep my hands busy. The security monitors flickered in my peripheral vision. 12 screens showing different angles of the warehouse, all empty corridors and neat rows of shelving. Normal. Boring. Exactly what I wanted to see. 1:58. I'd been planning this for the last hour. Simple strategy. Finish eating, clean up, find some paperwork to organize on the far side of the room. Keep my back to the monitors from 2 to 2:15, just like the rule said. Easy enough. The mechanical hum of the building seemed louder in the quiet office. Air circulation, refrigeration units, the distant buzz of fluorescent lights. I'd gotten used to the background noise, but now every sound felt amplified. 1:59. I wrapped up the rest of my sandwich and tossed it in the trash. 30 seconds to go. I could do this. Just turn around, find something else to focus on, wait it out. 2 a.m. exactly. A tremendous crash echoed through the warehouse, metal on concrete like someone had dropped a forklift from the ceiling. The sound came from the loading dock area, loud enough to rattle the windows in the security office. My head snapped toward the monitors before I could stop myself. Camera 7 showed the loading dock. Empty. But Camera 8... I froze. A shadow stood in the center of the frame. Not a person casting a shadow, but a shadow itself, tall and impossibly thin, darker than the surrounding darkness. Its head tilted at an angle that made my neck hurt just looking at it, like someone had twisted it too far to the left. The figure wasn't moving, but somehow I knew it was staring directly through the camera, at me. My hand shot out and slammed the monitor's power button. The screen went black just as the shadow took a single step forward, its movement stuttering like a film reel with missing frames. Above me, footsteps started on the metal roof. Slow, deliberate, moving from the loading dock area toward the center of the building. Toward the skylight directly over my head. I grabbed my flashlight and ran. The warehouse floor felt different at 2 a.m., shadows deeper and more angular. I weaved between shipping containers, putting as much distance as possible between myself and the security office. My boots echoed against the concrete, but the footsteps above kept pace, following my path across the roof. I ducked behind a stack of pallets and checked my watch. 2:03. 12 more minutes. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. I held my breath, pressing my back against the wooden pallets. Something creaked above me. Not the normal settling sounds of the building, but deliberate weight shifting. Like someone testing the strength of the roof panels. 2:05. A new sound started. Scratching. Long, slow scrapes against metal, rhythmic and purposeful. Whatever was up there was working at something, trying to get through. I closed my eyes and counted seconds. 60 Mississippi, 61 Mississippi. The scratching continued, sometimes pausing, sometimes doubling in intensity. At 2:10, I heard what sounded like glass cracking. 2:15. The scratching stopped mid-scrape. The footsteps resumed, moving away from my position, back toward the loading dock. I waited another full minute before moving, my legs cramped from crouching. The security office looked exactly the same when I returned at 2:20. Same desk, same chair, same stack of paperwork. But the skylight above the desk now had long scratches in the glass. 4 parallel lines that definitely hadn't been there an hour ago. And the monitor I'd turned off was displaying static. I stared at the screen. The power button was still in the off position, but gray and white snow filled the display, crackling softly. I reached behind the unit and unplugged it completely. The static continued for another 10 seconds before finally going dark. I opened the security log and picked up a pen. My hand was shaking enough that my first attempt at writing was illegible. I tried again, forcing my fingers to stay steady. 2:20 a.m. Equipment malfunction on monitor number 8. Unit unplugged for maintenance check. The pen felt heavy in my hand. I wanted to write what I'd actually seen, the shadow figure, the footsteps, the scratches that appeared on glass that should have been impossible to reach from outside. But who would believe that? And more importantly, what would happen if I put the truth in an official log? I closed the book and leaned back in the chair, careful not to look up at the damaged skylight. 3.5 hours left in my shift. 3 more rules to navigate. The turkey sandwich sat like a rock in my stomach, but I was still here, still employed, still following the protocol that was keeping me safe from whatever lived in this building after dark. I picked up my clipboard and headed back to Section B. Time to get back to work. I kept my distance from the employee lockers, setting up at a desk in the shipping office where I could see down the hallway without getting anywhere near that water fountain. 2:25 a.m. 5 minutes to go. The desk was covered with invoices that needed filing, perfect busy work to keep my hands occupied. I pulled out a stack of delivery confirmations and started organizing them by date, trying to look like someone who definitely had important work to do in this specific location at this specific time. 2:28. The mechanical hum of the building felt louder here, or maybe I was just more aware of every sound. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a compressor kicked on. Normal warehouse noises that I was learning to catalog and dismiss. 2:30 exactly. Footsteps echoed from the direction of the lockers. Slow, deliberate, like someone walking with purpose but in no hurry to get there. I kept my eyes on the invoices, sorting them into neat piles while my peripheral vision tracked the empty hallway. The footsteps stopped. Then came the sound of drinking. Long, continuous gulps that went on, like someone draining a gallon jug without stopping for air. The sound stretched past what should have been possible, 30 seconds, 45, a full minute of uninterrupted swallowing. I gripped my pen tighter and focused on the paperwork. Invoice 4471, delivered Tuesday. Invoice 4472, delivered Wednesday. Simple tasks. Concrete reality. Caroline. My hand froze mid-signature. The voice was soft, familiar, coming from the direction of the water fountain. It sounded exactly like my mother calling me in for dinner when I was 8 years old. That same gentle tone she used when she didn't want to wake Dad from his afternoon nap. But Mom was 8 hours away in Alberta, probably asleep in her own bed. I forced myself to keep writing. Invoice 4473. The numbers blurred slightly, but I blinked and they came back into focus. Caroline, honey, where are you? The voice was closer now, moving down the hallway. Still Mom's voice, but with an edge of worry that made my chest tighten. She sounded lost, confused, like she'd been looking for me for hours. I bit the inside of my cheek hard enough to taste copper and kept sorting papers. This wasn't real. This was whatever lived in the warehouse after dark, playing games with sounds and voices. Mom was safe at home, not wandering around a warehouse in Calgary at 2:30 in the morning. The footsteps resumed, coming closer. Each step echoed against the concrete floor with a wet sound, like someone walking in puddles. Please, Caroline, I need you. Now the voice was crying, broken sobs between words. The sound of my mother in pain, desperate and afraid. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to help, to find out what was wrong. I wrote my name at the bottom of an invoice with shaking fingers. Caroline Walker. The pen skipped on the R, but I kept going. The footsteps stopped just outside my peripheral vision, close enough that I should have been able to see whoever it was if I turned my head even slightly. But I kept my eyes locked on the desk, on the safe rectangle of paperwork and normal office supplies. Breathing started behind me. Not the steady rhythm of human lungs, but something erratic and wrong. Sometimes rapid and shallow, like someone hyperventilating. Sometimes stopping completely for 30 seconds before starting again with a wet, rattling sound. I know about the nightmares, sweetheart. The voice was right behind my chair now, so close I could feel the words against my ear. Still Mom's voice, but speaking in a whisper that carried impossible knowledge. The ones where you're drowning, where you hear your father calling your name from under the water. My pen stopped moving. Those dreams had been haunting me since I was 16, since Dad died. I'd never told anyone about them, not even Mom, especially not Mom. You wake up gasping, don't you? Feeling like your lungs are full of lake water. Cold breath touched the back of my neck. Not the warm exhalation of human lungs, but something that felt like winter air, sharp and thin. And last Tuesday, you dreamed about the farm again, about finding Dad in the grain silo. But this time he was still alive, still calling for help. I gripped the pen so hard my knuckles went white. That nightmare had been different from the others, more vivid, more cruel. I'd woken up crying and spent the rest of the night sitting by my window, afraid to go back to sleep. How could you leave me, Caroline? How could you move so far away when you knew I needed you? The voice was breaking now, full of the guilt I carried every day, the knowledge that I'd abandoned my mother to chase better pay, that I was 8 hours away when she might need help, that I was a selfish daughter who put money before family. I'm so alone without you, so scared. Something touched my shoulder. Not a hand, but something cold and damp that felt like it had too many joints. The touch was gentle, almost loving, but wrong in every way that mattered. I forced myself to pick up another invoice. Invoice 4474. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely read the numbers, but I kept going. This wasn't Mom. This wasn't real. This was just another test, another rule to follow. Look at me, Caroline, please. I've come such a long way to find you. The presence moved around my chair, staying just outside my direct vision. I caught glimpses of movement, something tall and pale that didn't quite hold the right shape. But I kept my eyes on the desk, on the safe reality of paperwork and filing systems. Your father misses you too. He wants to see you again. That voice. Dad's voice now, warm and familiar, the way he used to sound when he read me bedtime stories. But Dad had been dead for 10 years, buried in the cemetery behind the Lutheran church where I'd left flowers every year until I moved away. Come home, kiddo. Come back to the farm. We're waiting for you. The breathing was directly in front of me now, irregular and wet. I could smell something like stagnant water and rotting leaves, the scent of the pond behind our house where Dad used to take me fishing. 2:55, 5 more minutes. I could do this. I picked up my pen and started writing random words on a blank piece of paper. My name, my address, anything to keep my hands moving and my eyes focused on something real. We know you're scared, Caroline. We know you think you're going crazy. Mom's voice again, but distorted now, like someone speaking through water. But you're not crazy. You're just finally seeing the truth. Finally understanding what's been waiting for you all along. The cold presence pressed closer, and I felt something like fingers trailing through my hair. Not human fingers. Too long, too cold, with joints that bent in directions that made my skin crawl. Turn around, sweetheart. Let us see your face. 2:58. The breathing stopped completely. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant hum of machinery and the scratching of my pen against paper. Even the air felt different, thinner, like the pressure had dropped. 2:59. Caroline? All 3 voices at once now, Mom, Dad, and something else underneath that I didn't recognize. Something that had never been human, speaking my name like a prayer or a curse. 3 a.m. exactly. The presence vanished. Not gradually, not with footsteps walking away, but instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The cold air warmed, the pressure normalized, and the normal warehouse sounds returned. I sat frozen for another full minute before finally turning around. The hallway was empty. But leading from the water fountain to my chair was a trail of wet footprints, each one larger than any human foot should be. And between what should have been toes, I could see the clear outline of webbing, like something that belonged in deep water rather than walking on dry land. The footprints stopped directly behind my chair and simply ended, as if whatever had been standing there had evaporated into nothing. I stared at the evidence for a long moment, then picked up my pen and added a note to the bottom of my inventory sheet. Water fountain area, possible leak, maintenance required. The truth was too big for an official report, but the wet footprints were real, and they were proof that I wasn't losing my mind. I gathered up my paperwork and headed back toward Section C, giving the water fountain a wide berth as I passed. 2 rules down, 3 to go. The night was only half over. I checked my watch as I positioned myself near the main shipping corridor. 3:13 a.m. 1 minute to go. Jim's patrol route took him through this area around 3:15, which meant I needed to be close enough to find him when the barking started. The 3rd rule was clear. Find another worker. Don't investigate alone. After what I'd experienced with the monitors and the water fountain, I wasn't about to test what happened if I ignored the protocol. 3:14. I leaned against a stack of shipping containers, trying to look casual while keeping my eyes on both ends of the corridor. The warehouse felt different at this hour, like the building itself was holding its breath. Even the mechanical sounds seemed muted, as if the air conditioning and refrigeration units were running quieter than usual. 3:15 exactly. The barking started, deep, rumbling sounds that seemed to come from inside the walls themselves, like someone had trapped a pack of wolves in the ventilation system. But these weren't normal dog sounds. They were too low, too sustained, with an edge that made my teeth ache. I pushed off from the containers and headed toward the shipping area where Jim should be making his rounds. The barking got louder as I moved, echoing from multiple directions until I couldn't tell where it was actually coming from. Above me, something heavy shifted in the ceiling ducts, metal groaning under weight that shouldn't have been there. "Jim," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Just more barking, now joined by what sounded like claws scraping against metal. Long, deliberate scratches that sent shivers down my spine. I found his clipboard first, lying abandoned on the concrete floor near a row of pallets. The aluminum surface was scored with fresh claw marks, 4 parallel lines that had gouged deep enough to curl the metal edges. Whatever had done this was strong enough to shred aluminum like paper. The barking intensified, coming from directly overhead now. I looked up to see one of the ceiling vents bulging downward, the metal grate straining against something pushing from inside. Dust rained down as the ductwork groaned and buckled. I ran. Behind me, I heard the screech of tearing metal and a heavy thud as something large hit the floor where I'd been standing. I didn't look back. The barking was everywhere now, bouncing off the walls and ceiling in a cacophony that made it impossible to think clearly. Movement caught my eye near the loading dock. Another person, thank God. A man in a button-down shirt, the same guy I'd seen earlier walking with a notebook. He looked scared but alert, scanning the area like he knew exactly what was happening. "Hey!" I shouted, running toward him. He turned at my voice, and I saw relief flash across his face. "Over here," he called back, gesturing toward a storage closet built into the wall near the dock doors. I reached him just as something pale and wolf-like dropped from a ceiling vent where I'd been standing moments before. In the split second I glimpsed it, the thing looked wrong in every way. Too large, too pale, with limbs that bent at angles that hurt to look at. The man grabbed my arm and pulled me into the storage closet, slamming the door behind us. We pressed against the back wall, both breathing hard in the cramped space that smelled like cleaning supplies and cardboard. "Declan," he whispered, extending his hand. "Declan Carlson." "Caroline Walker." I shook his hand quickly. Then we both fell silent as something sniffed loudly under the door gap. The sound was wet and deliberate, like a bloodhound tracking a scent, but amplified beyond anything natural. I could see the door gap from where we stood, a thin line of light from the warehouse floor, and watched as something blocked it completely, moving back and forth as whatever was out there investigated our hiding spot. Then I saw the eyes. 4 sets of them, bright and reflective, positioned at different heights like they belonged to creatures of varying sizes. They appeared in the gap one at a time, tilting and moving as they tried to peer into our hiding space. The lowest set was at floor level, the highest almost at the top of the gap, which meant whatever was out there was either very tall or very good at climbing. The sniffing stopped. For a moment, everything was quiet except for our careful breathing and the distant mechanical hum of the building. Then came the tapping. Slow, rhythmic taps against the door, but not with claws. These sounded like human fingers, patient and methodical. Tap, 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 pause. Tap, 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 pause. The pattern repeated, almost musical, like someone drumming their fingers while they waited. Declan's hand found my shoulder in the darkness, a steadying presence that kept me from bolting. His breathing was controlled like he'd done this before, like he knew the rules and was following them just as carefully as I was. The tapping continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sometimes it moved to different parts of the door. Sometimes it stopped completely before starting again. Through it all, those bright eyes kept appearing and disappearing in the gap, watching, waiting. At 3:30 exactly, the barking stopped mid-howl. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise had been. No more scratching, no more sniffing, no more tapping. Even the eyes vanished from the door gap, leaving only the thin line of warehouse light. We waited another full minute before Declan carefully opened the door and peered out. "Clear," he whispered. The corridor looked normal again, but I could see long scratch marks on the concrete floor leading away from our hiding spot. Whatever had been out there was gone, but it had left evidence of its presence. "We need to find Jim," I said. Declan nodded. "He'll be near the break room. They usually leave people there when they're done." The casual way he said it made my stomach clench. "They?" "Later. Let's find your supervisor first." We found Jim unconscious, but breathing near the break room entrance, slumped against the wall like someone had dragged him there and dropped him. His shirt was torn in long strips, and deep scratches covered both arms, red and angry but not bleeding heavily. "Jim?" I knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Strong and steady, but his skin was cold and clammy. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Caroline? What?" He tried to sit up, winced, and settled back against the wall. "Did you follow the rules?" "Yeah. Found Declan when the barking started." Jim's gaze shifted to Declan, who was standing guard near the corner, watching both directions down the hallway. "Good. That's good." He looked at his torn shirt and scratched arms like he was seeing them for the first time. I was alone too long. Should have known better. What happened? Doesn't matter. What matters is you're both okay. Jim struggled to his feet, accepting my help to stand. "We need to get to the first aid kit. Clean these up before they get infected." As we walked toward the break room, I caught Declan's eye. He gave me a small nod, like we'd passed some kind of test together. Like we were both part of something now that couldn't be explained in any employee handbook. 3 rules down, 2 to go. And I was starting to understand that surviving this job meant more than just following protocol. It meant accepting that some things couldn't be rationalized away, no matter how much I wanted them to make sense. The night was far from over. I helped Jim to the break room, my hands shaking as I unwrapped gauze from the first aid kit. The scratches on his arms looked worse under the fluorescent lights. 4 parallel lines on each forearm, deep enough that I could see the edges of torn muscle beneath. "Hold still," I said, dabbing antiseptic on the wounds. Jim hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "Should have stayed closer to the main corridor," he muttered, staring at the wall behind me. No better than to be alone too long during the barking period. I wrapped the gauze around his left arm, trying to keep the bandage tight without cutting off circulation. "What got you?" "Doesn't matter what it was. Matters that I broke protocol." He flexed his fingers, testing the bandage. "Been doing this job 8 years and I still make stupid mistakes." The clock on the wall read 3:58. 2 minutes until the 4th rule kicked in. I finished wrapping Jim's right arm and gathered up the bloody gauze, tossing it in the trash. "We need to turn around," I said. Jim nodded and shifted his chair so his back was to the door. I did the same, both of us facing the far wall where someone had taped a motivational poster about teamwork. The irony wasn't lost on me. 4 a.m. exactly. The scratching started immediately. Not the random scraping I'd heard on the roof earlier, but something deliberate and complex. Multiple sets of claws working in coordination, tracing patterns across the door's surface. The sound was methodical, almost artistic, like someone carving an intricate design into the metal. Jim's breathing quickened beside me. I reached over and found his hand, squeezing it as the scratching intensified. His palm was slick with sweat, and I could feel his pulse hammering against my thumb. The doorknob began to turn. I watched our reflection in the dark window across from us as the handle rotated slowly, completely around, then around again. The lock was engaged. I'd checked it myself when we sat down, but the mechanism turned anyway, metal grinding against metal in a way that made my teeth ache. Caroline. Jim's voice, coming from outside the door, weak and pained, exactly the way he'd sounded when we found him unconscious in the hallway. Caroline, I'm hurt. Please let me in. The real Jim's hand tightened around mine. His lips were pressed together in a thin line, and he stared straight ahead at the motivational poster like his life depended on it. The scratching continued underneath the voice, a constant background rhythm that seemed to match the fake Jim's words. Whatever was out there was multitasking, speaking while its claws worked at the door. I think something's broken inside. I need help. The voice was perfect. Every inflection, every pause, exactly the way Jim spoke when he was trying not to worry someone. If I hadn't been sitting next to him, if I hadn't seen his lips staying firmly closed, I would have believed it completely. The door shuddered. Not from the scratching, but from something massive hitting it. The metal bulged inward with each impact, and I could hear the frame groaning under the pressure. Whatever was out there was throwing its full weight against the door, trying to break through by force. Bang. The door bent inward 6 inches. Bang. The hinges creaked ominously. Bang. A hairline crack appeared in the metal near the handle. Warren here, came a new voice. Younger, scared. Caroline, Jim, are you in there? Something's chasing me. Please open the door. I didn't recognize the name Warren, but the voice sounded like the kid in the red hoodie I'd seen earlier. Young and desperate, the kind of fear that made you want to help regardless of the consequences. Jim shook his head slightly, still staring at the poster. His message was clear. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge. Don't give whatever was out there any reason to think we were listening. The pounding stopped, but the scratching continued. Now it sounded like fingernails on a chalkboard, high and sharp, tracing letters or symbols I couldn't identify. Mom? My blood turned to ice. Caroline, honey, where are you? I drove all the way from Alberta. I'm so worried about you. Mom's voice, tired and frightened, exactly the way she'd sounded when she called to tell me about her latest test results. The voice that had kept me awake for 3 nights straight, wondering if I should quit this job and move back home. I know you're in there, sweetheart. I can hear you breathing. The scratching moved lower on the door, and I realized whatever was out there was crouched down, working at the gap between the door and the floor, trying to get underneath, or maybe just trying to see inside. Please don't ignore me, Caroline. I need you. Tears started down my cheeks before I could stop them. That was exactly what Mom had said during our last phone call when she'd tried to convince me to come home for Christmas, even though I couldn't afford the time off. The guilt in her voice, the careful way she'd asked without actually asking. Jim's hand squeezed mine harder, anchoring me to reality. This wasn't Mom. Mom was 8 hours away, safe in her own house, probably asleep. This was something else, something that knew exactly which buttons to push. Help me. A child's voice now, high and terrified. A little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sobbing between words. Please help me. I'm lost, and I can't find my mommy. The scratching had moved to the center of the door, and I could see the metal actually bending outward in places, like something was pushing through from the other side. But that was impossible. The door was solid steel, 3 inches thick. I'm scared. It's so dark out here. The child's voice broke into heartbroken sobs that made my chest ache. Every maternal instinct I had screamed at me to turn around, to open the door, to help. But Jim's grip on my hand kept me facing forward, kept me following the rules that were keeping us alive. 4:03. Frost began spreading across the inside of the door. I could see it in the reflection from the window. White crystals forming in delicate patterns, spreading outward from the handle like frozen spider webs. The temperature in the room hadn't changed, but the door was cold enough to freeze the moisture in the air. The scratching changed direction, moving in deliberate strokes across the frosted surface. Whatever was out there was writing something, tracing letters or symbols through the ice. I caught glimpses of the pattern in the window's reflection, but the words were backwards and I couldn't make them out. The child's voice had stopped crying. Now it was singing. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The melody was perfect, sweet, and innocent, but there was something wrong with the rhythm. The pauses between words were too long, like the singer was struggling to remember the lyrics. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. The frost on the door grew thicker and the scratching became more frantic. Long, sweeping strokes that covered the entire surface, working faster and faster as if whatever was out there was running out of time. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are." The song repeated, but this time the voice was deeper. Still a child, but older. Then it repeated again, deeper still, until it sounded like a grown man singing a lullaby in a voice that belonged to a 6-year-old girl. 4:05 exactly. Everything stopped. The scratching, the singing, the pounding, all of it cut off mid-sound like someone had flipped a switch. The frost on the door began disappearing immediately, melting away so fast it left no trace of moisture behind. Jim and I sat in complete silence for another full minute before either of us moved. When I finally turned around, the door looked completely normal. No dents, no cracks, no sign that anything had been trying to break through. But when I walked over to examine it more closely, I found deep gouges in the metal on the outside. Not random scratches, but a deliberate pattern carved into the steel. The marks formed the outline of a massive handprint, but with too many fingers. 7 or 8 digits, each one ending in claw marks that had scored the metal like it was soft wood. I traced one of the gouges with my finger. The metal edges were still warm. 4 rules down, Jim said quietly behind me. 1 to go. I looked at the handprint again, counting the finger marks. 8 digits, each one longer than any human hand should have. Whatever had been trying to get in was big enough to leave marks this high on the door, strong enough to carve through steel, and smart enough to perfectly mimic voices it had never heard. And we still had 3 hours left until sunrise. I stared at the security desk clock. 5:28 a.m. 2 more hours until my shift ended. But something felt different about the warehouse now. The air was lighter, less oppressive, like whatever lived here after dark was already starting to retreat. Jim sat in the chair beside me, his bandaged arms resting carefully on the desk. The color had returned to his face, and he'd stopped wincing every time he moved. Whatever those things had done to him was healing faster than it should have. "Final security check," he said, nodding toward the bank of monitors. "Need to make sure everything's clear before day shift arrives." I reached for the power button on monitor 8, the one I'd shut off during the first rule. My hand hesitated over the switch. "It's safe now," Jim said. "After 5 a.m., they don't use the cameras anymore." I flipped the switch. The screen flickered to life, showing the loading dock area in grainy black and white. Empty pallets, normal shadows, nothing that shouldn't be there. I moved to the next monitor, then the next, checking each camera feed systematically. Everything looked normal until I reached camera 7. I was watching myself walk through aisle 15. My double moved with mechanical precision, organizing boxes I'd already sorted hours ago. Same ponytail, same work shirt, same steel-toed boots. But something was wrong with the way it moved. Too smooth, too deliberate, like someone following choreographed steps. "Jim," my voice came out as a whisper. He leaned forward to look at the screen. "Shit. Rule 5. The double turned toward the camera, and I saw its face clearly for the first time. Almost perfect, except the eyes were solid black, and its smile stretched too wide, showing too many teeth. I grabbed the security log and wrote quickly, Aisle 15, off limits, due to equipment malfunction. Alternate routes required. Good, Jim said. Mark it and stay away. Don't go near that section. I switched to camera 12 to check the alternate route to the exit. The screen showed the security desk where we were sitting, but it was empty. Then my double walked into frame and sat down in my chair, copying the exact movements I'd made minutes ago. It's here, I said. Jim looked at the monitor, then at me, then back at the screen. Jesus, it's learning fast. On camera 12, my double picked up a pen and started writing in the security log, its movements perfectly mirroring what I'd just done. But when it looked up at the camera, those black eyes stared directly through the screen, and its too wide smile never wavered. What happens if I see it in person? It tries to replace you. Jim's voice was flat, matter of fact. Takes your place, sends you somewhere else. We need to get you out of here. I switched off all the monitors and grabbed my thermos. Day shift starts at 6. How long until people get here? First arrivals show up around 5:45. We wait by the exit, stay in groups. We made our way through the warehouse, taking the long route that avoided aisle 15 completely. I kept expecting to see my double around every corner, but the corridors stayed empty. Just normal warehouse space, metal shelving and concrete floors, and the distant hum of machinery. The exit door felt like salvation when we reached it. Jim leaned against the wall beside the time clock, and I pulled out my phone to check the security app I'd downloaded earlier. The cameras were still accessible remotely, and I scrolled through the feeds one by one. Camera 12 showed my double, still sitting at the security desk, writing in the log with mechanical precision. Camera 7 showed it organizing boxes in aisle 15. Camera 3 showed it walking down the main corridor. There's more than one, I said, showing Jim the phone screen. He looked at the feeds and swore under his breath. That's new. Usually it's just one at a time. On camera 5, another double appeared, this one wearing Jim's flannel shirt and moving with his careful, measured gait. It walked through the break room, checking the coffee pot and straightening chairs. They're copying both of us. Day shift can't see them, Jim said. They only show up on cameras and to night workers, but if you make contact... He didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Whatever happened when you met your double, it wasn't something you came back from. At 5:45, I heard car doors slamming in the parking lot. Voices carried through the morning air. Normal people talking about normal things. Coffee, weekend plans, someone's kid's soccer game. The first day shift worker came through the door at 5:58. A woman in her 40s wearing a company polo shirt and carrying a travel mug. She nodded at us politely and headed toward the time clock. I watched my phone screen as she walked past camera 12. My double was still sitting at the security desk, but the day shift worker showed no sign of seeing it. She clocked in normally and disappeared into the warehouse. More workers arrived, a steady stream of people starting their normal jobs in a normal building. None of them reacted to the doubles that showed up on every camera feed, perfect copies going through the motions of night shift work. At 6 a.m. exactly, all the doubles disappeared. Not gradually, not walking away, but vanishing between one frame and the next. I scrolled through every camera feed, but they were gone completely. The only trace left was a dark stain on the floor where my double had been standing at the time clock. A wet mark that looked like spilled coffee but was too dark, too thick. Time to go, Jim said. I clocked out with shaking hands, my fingers fumbling with the time card. The machine beeped normally, printing my hours in neat black numbers. 7 hours and 53 minutes, a full night's work, documented and official. Jim walked me to the parking lot, moving carefully but steadily. The morning sun was just breaking over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossibly bright after 8 hours of fluorescent lights. "Most people quit after the first night," he said as I unlocked my car. "Call in sick, never come back, find excuses to avoid the place completely. And the ones who don't quit, learn to follow the rules, adapt, survive." He pulled a napkin from his pocket and handed it to me. "You did better than most. Made it through all 5 rules without breaking protocol." I unfolded the napkin. 3 more rules were written in Jim's careful handwriting. 6. Never eat food from the vending machines after your first week. 7. If the elevator moves between floors on its own, take the stairs for the rest of the night. 8. Don't trust anyone who claims to be a new employee after Halloween. Rules 6 through 8, Jim said, for people who survive their first night. I stared at the napkin. There are more. There are always more. But these 3 will keep you alive through your second week. He paused, studying my face. "You coming back tonight?" I thought about my bank account, about Mom's medical bills, about the apartment I could barely afford and the future I was trying to build. $22 an hour plus benefits. More money than I'd ever made, enough to actually get ahead instead of just surviving. "Yeah," I said, "I'll be back." Jim nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Good. Get some sleep, eat a real meal, try not to think about it too much. Tonight will be different, but you know the rules now." I drove home as the sun climbed higher, normal traffic filling the streets with normal people heading to normal jobs. The warehouse disappeared in my rearview mirror, just another industrial building in a city full of them. But I could still feel those black eyes watching me from the security cameras. And I knew that somewhere in that building, dark stains were slowly fading from concrete floors. I had 8 rules memorized now, and a job that paid better than anything I'd ever done. Tonight, I'd go back and learn what came next.